the issue of transformative justice, or at least the very serious and quite successful attempt to sketch all the data, or to bring all the data of this rich study and various rich studies into this comprehensive framework of what Roman has called transformative justice. He's not the only one who talks about that. There is an emerging trend, I would say, in the transitional justice to move beyond the transition and to think and to conceptualize the transformative character, transformative potential of certain measures. But he's certainly amongst those who brings it into a very logical format and a compelling and convincing argument. And I haven't seen that very often around in the literature. So, great. I think it's really a lot of very strong points that make the book more than worth reading. I think it is a must in every reading list of every course on transitional justice in the next coming years. Having said this, if you would allow me to make a couple of critical remarks as well, and then come to some questioning. First of all, I see one or two places where I have a little difficulty in conceptual terms. And I'm putting this to Roman already. I'm sure he will be able to elucidate that for us. One is one conceptual issue, which I found, and again, please correct me if I see it wrongly, but where you talk about justice measures, you have identified 4 sets, and you repeated them here, starting from retributive, revelatory, reparatory, and then reconciliatory measures. Okay, fair enough. But then you talk about justice as an outcome, let's say, and reconciliation as an outcome. Now, my question is about this category of reconciliatory measures, which actually are not part of reconciliation in your concept, but they are justice. But on the other hand, they're very much related to reconciliation. So I can see a sort of overlap here between the justice component and the reconciliation component, and the overlap lies exactly in this 4th category of reconciliatory measures. So I would like to ask you why you have done it in this way, and whether this does not contaminate a little bit the interpretation that's later on in the text and towards the end, towards the conclusion you draw. Because when you say, for example, that reconciliatory measures are very important, and particularly apologies, in order to reach some kind of justice and some kind of reconciliation, aren't you actually conflating the 2 main concepts here? Because it's finally, at the end of the day, I would say it's more reconciliation than it's justice. But conceptually, the apology is put under the reconciliatory measures. Now, along the same lines, just a quick question, a sideline question, if you wish. You put apology under reconciliatory measures. Can't find the exact page where you do that, but when you explain all these 4 categories of measures, for you, apology is part of the 4th category. And I was just wondering if it could not also be seen as a form of reparative or reparative justice measures. And if we take the basic principles and guidelines of the UN of 2005, then, of course, you have this 4th category where it's called satisfactory measures. Some of them relate to judicial investigations for the crimes committed, and others relate to symbolic measures. Now, apology is explicitly mentioned as one of the possibilities of a symbolic measure. So, at least in some texts and maybe some concepts, it could be seen as a form of reparation, while you put it under another category. Maybe it's just the play upon words. I just want to hear your ideas about that. Then Another conceptual issue relates to the final stages of the book, where you want to go beyond the traditional, let's say, concepts of justice, and you list specifically retributive and restorative justice, and then you want to come to transformative justice. And one of the arguments that is used in order to defend this idea of transformative justice is that restorative justice is more about reconnecting and reestablishing the contacts and the relationships of the past. While transformative justice, much beyond that, you argue, and is actually requiring a transformation both of the offender and the victim. I'm not sure if I fully agree with that, because I think it downplays a little bit some more recent trends in restorative justice that also include the transformation element as part of the restoration. Because in many cases of restorative justice, it is impossible just to go back to the past or to go back to the past relationships, because either they do not exist anymore or they never existed in the first place. If two people in the street, for example, two strangers meet each other and one victimizes the other, well, there is not really a relationship to go back to. So restoration in this sense already means a certain form of transformation whereby the individuals would need to deal with what happened and try to go beyond that. And some even argue, restorative justice, that is, that transformation also includes the societal component. For example, it's not limited, they say, to relationships between individuals, victims and offenders, but also would include the community safety, for example, or the social conditions in the community or the city or the society. So I think in restorative justice, in other words, there is a lot of transformational aspect already. And my question is, aren't you putting the two too much in confrontation to each other rather than in a linear development or on a continuum whereby transformative justice would definitely mean something else, but maybe not so different from restorative justice as you seem to suggest. And finally, if you allow me one more, and then I'm really curious about the answers and the further discussion. One more is a particular quote on page 203, which goes indeed towards the end. It's part of the conclusion of the book, where it said that one of your main conclusions is that there is, in the Czech Republic at least, a justice without reconciliation. And it has to do a lot, you argue, with the fact that there was collective measures of justice, or groups, in other words, but not for individual members. I find that very intriguing, because I think it really explains a lot about the defiance, about the resistance of the communists vis-a-vis their victims, and so on. But if you look at it, at this particular statement, couldn't you also draw an argument to say, well, more prosecution may be needed, because prosecution in itself cannot be a collective measure. Prosecution, criminal prosecution that is necessarily an individual matter. Maybe lustration is not, maybe banning people from entering specific services or specific functions is not, but prosecution is a very individual matter. So if you say justice was mostly collective and therefore it hardly contributed to reconciliation, could you inversely argue that more prosecutions, which are individual measures, could contribute to reconciliation? It's a bit of a provocative question, I know, but let's see. I have some other issues as well, but maybe they can come up in debate. But I would like to congratulate you. It's a very well-written book, very clearly formulated with wonderful research questions and very well elaborated. Thank you so much for listening.
And thank you so much for that thoughtful commentaries. We're going to first briefly give Roman the word to be able to respond to those questions, and then we're going to open it up.
Okay. Thank you, Stephan, for your kind words. I must say it exceeded my expectations of what can be said about my work. I'm happy that you spotted things which I also thought would be kind of a strength of the book. But let me answer your questions. I wrote them down, and I think some questions are easier than others. But let me try to answer them all as well as possible. You mentioned the possibility of outcomes or threat of an overlap, for example, in the reconciliatory measures. And this question, I already faced these questions once in the kind of a more kind of a nominal question. Why reconciliatory measures and why reconciliation? It is like I'm suggesting that the reconciliatory measures are bound to result in the reconciliation. No, they are not, and I would say, and that there is no overlap. And I will tell you why. First of all, for example, reconciliatory measures which I use in this book is predominantly apology. And when I'm trying to study reconciliation as an outcome variable, then I'm measuring, for example, forgiveness, or I'm measuring abandonment of revenge, or this type of questions. There are 4 categories of reconciliation. So there is conceptually there is no overlap, and secondly, apology is not bound to result in reconciliation, and then we have a situation that this may not result in reconciliation. And in my findings, I also found in one survey which I conducted in Myanmar,